So today's lesson will be mostly on our sides. So anybody who needs a pillow or some sort of head support for lying on your side, just find something and make something that's comfortable. And for now, please lie on your backs. Some of you have done many lessons. Some of you are quite new to this. So just notice what you notice when you are invited to notice how your body feels, what kind of pressures you feel on the ground, what parts of your body does your mind attend to. And is it more facile at looking at the uncomfortable parts of your body? Or did you just notice how nice it is to rest? The weight of the back of your shoulders? Any differences from the right or left sides? The weight of the back of your head? And just notice, is your head rolled a little right or a little left? Feel the support on your back. You might notice a little arching away of your lower back. The support behind your pelvis and buttocks. And again, any subtle differences from the left to right side. Most of us have them, but it can take a while to really cultivate the ability to feel those differences. And those differences really become our friends, because when you're out there walking in the world, sometimes the easiest thing to come back to this now moment to pay attention to is the differences in how your right and left side feel, how you're sitting asymmetrically or using your shoulders or arms differently. It's often the physical sensation of one's body that can bring you right back here to this perfect moment. And the most wonderful physical movements that we do naturally all day long is breathing. And at moments we do it better than at other moments. Sometimes I point out to people that their day is often an inhalation in the morning when they get out of bed, and then one long exhalation at night when they lie back down. And then they wonder why they hurt or can't sleep. So just feel how you're breathing now, lying like this on your back. Notice, does most of the movement happen in your chest and your ribs? Is there a sense of any breath down in your belly? Down below your belly button? In your center? And really notice how the ribs just softly raise and lower. And see if you can feel differences in the right side and the left side. Does one side of your ribs lift a little more easily, or does it one side feel a little tighter than the other side? And you could even put your hands on different places on your sides and across your chest just to feel your own ribs. With each breath, inhaling and exhaling. And even notice the space between the ribs. Can you feel how as you breathe in, the space opens, the ribs gap a little bit, just a little, lightly. And as you breathe out, the ribs lower and come a little closer together. And then roll onto your left side, please. And if lying on your side is uncomfortable for any reason, stay on your back. You can do this lesson easily, most parts of it on your back, and you can visualize it. But if you're able to, lying on your side will provide certain advantages. And just notice the difference, the distance between the right side of your pelvis and your right shoulder. And the space in between there. Your waist is there, your ribs are there, each rib all the way up under your armpit and even towards your shoulder, wrapping around your right side. And just intentionally breathe, visualizing the breath going into that right lung and filling those right ribs. And see if you can have a sense of just that gentle opening of the right side with the inhalation. And then a softening, the pelvis, the shoulder come a little closer together with the exhalation. And as you're lying there, all of you are facing just the right direction. Just peek up here for a minute at the skeleton. And just notice how these ribs go all the way up under the clavicle, under the collarbone, and they wrap from front to back, from sternum to backbone. All of them wrapping, creating this lovely space. And yet it's not a true cage like we often refer to it as. Each of these ribs can move. They all have muscles that help stabilize and mobilize them as needed. Often a little overly stabilized. So close your eyes again and imagine that your breath is like a paintbrush. And each time you breathe in, you're painting the inside of your ribs. Starting with the upper rib, you breathe in and you paint the inside of that rib from the sternum to the backbone, and you breathe out. And you breathe in and you go to the second rib, and just with your imagination, imagine just softly brushing along the inside of the ribs, between the ribs and the lungs, and just really filling up that space. Notice what color you're using. Maybe you use a different color with each rib. Notice what kind of paintbrush you chose. Maybe you're air brushing because it's your breath. Maybe it's thin and you're taking small little strokes. Or it's a big, fat, fluffy paintbrush and you're just brushing it along softly. Filling that space from the sternum, wrapping around to the spine, wrapping back to the sternum with each breath. And noticing also as you paint the inside of your ribs, is there any breath still available in your abdomen? Can you let your lower belly be soft so that the diaphragm can gently press down without being restricted from overly tight abdominal muscles? And then maintaining that sense of openness and space in the ribs on the right. Gently wrap your right arm over the top of your head so your fingers are pointed down towards your left ear, or maybe even holding on to your left ear. But your head is sort of cradled in your arm. And just very gently lift your head and lower it. And just feel what that's like. Try not to use the neck muscles too much. Really let the shoulder and the shoulder blade. Just aim the elbow downwards towards your pelvis And let the arm just lift and lower your head. And feel what happens in those ribs on the right side. Each time you lift your head, do the ribs have to contract a little bit, bringing the shoulder down towards the pelvis? And in order for something to lift up, something else presses down. So what presses into the floor? What gives you the stability so you can have this mobility? What allows your head to lift up? What's pressing into the floor? So you may notice that as these ribs come together, bringing the shoulder closer to the pelvis, something else is happening on the ribs on the left side. What's happening on that side? And then notice also how you're using your breath. Do you inhale as you lift your head and exhale as you lower it? Try that a few times. Inhaling, lifting, exhaling, lowering. And then try it the other way a few times. Lifting your head as you exhale. Can you feel the difference? Inhaling as you lower your head back down. And then just let your head rest and roll on your back. Take a rest. Is it possible to step even the smallest amount outside of yourself to observe where your mind considers you? Does it go to what's moving well? Does it go to what's sore and hurting and tired? Is it just glad that you're lying on your back and resting? Notice, have you been taking care of yourself? It's for some not a particularly easy move, wrapping the arm over the head and lifting your head. So did you do just enough lifts to feel it without overdoing it on any part of your neck, shoulder, or spine? Or did you follow an old pattern of doing it all, doing everything the teacher tells you to do to be a good student? Just notice. And then more interestingly, I hope, what are your ribs doing now with each inhalation and exhalation? Can you sense a difference in how you perceive your ribs on the right side compared to your left side? Can you still see or imagine how you painted the inside of the ribs on the right? And then again, roll onto your left sides, please. And remember, at any point, if you begin to get uncomfortable on your side, even before I suggest lying on your back, you can take a break. How do we learn to listen to ourselves through all the conditioning of doing what somebody else tells us? How do we learn to trust what we tell ourselves? Bring your attention back to the inhalation, the exhalation, and the influence of the opening and expanding and the softening and coming together of the ribs on the right side. And then bring your attention down to your foot. keeping your knees together, just gently raise your right foot up towards the ceiling and lower it back down onto your left foot. And just feel the rotation this creates in the thigh. And see if you can feel its influence on the pelvis. Does the pelvis want to roll upward a little bit as you lift your foot up towards the ceiling? And does it come back down to rest? And then notice with your foot resting, keep your foot resting on the left foot, and are you able to do that movement subtly just with your pelvis, just bringing it upward towards your right shoulder and downward? Is that harder to do, or is there a way to bring the pelvis up and down? So it's a side-to-side motion, making your side a little shorter and a little longer. And just play with that a little bit. If you need to, lift your foot a few more times and sort of see how the pelvis rolls. When the thigh rolls, it kind of helps roll the pelvis upward. And for most of you, the pelvis naturally rolls a little towards the shoulder as you raise that right foot towards the ceiling. How do you find that motion without so much movement in your thigh and hip joint? For some of us, it's a very natural movement. Kind of depends on your style of walking and standing. And for other people, a rotation, rolling forward and back is a more natural movement in the hip and pelvis and ribs. But today we're exploring shortening and lengthening in the ribs. And then just pause for a moment. Wrap your right hand over your head again. And a couple times, lift your head and your foot together and lower them together. See if you can feel how the pelvis comes closer to the right shoulder, the ribs all come closer together on the right side, and as you lower your head and foot back down, the whole side lengthens. And notice, how did you choose your breathing pattern? Notice, when do you naturally breathe in and out? For some of you, you're breathing in every time you lift your head and your foot. It's natural to inhale to prepare for movement or to prepare for anything. And for others of you, you tried exhaling. So whichever you did naturally, go ahead and switch and try the other way. And see if one style of breathing fits the pattern more for you, of the ribs coming together, the pelvis and shoulder getting more proximal to each other, and then the side lengthening as everything rests back down. And just rest for a minute. Take a few breaths and gently paint over the inside of those ribs with each inhalation. And this time, extend your hand upward, not towards the ceiling, but towards the wall above your head. So if you can just lengthen your elbow out a little bit, you might just rest your arm on your right ear, as if you were going to gently begin to reach towards the wall above your head. And just try that, gently reaching and lowering. Or sliding your hand on the floor, just raising it up and down. And for some of you, I see support. You might want to just give a little support to your right arm with your left hand, if that takes any stress or pressure off your shoulder or neck. And how does the reaching of your right arm influence the shoulder and the ribs on the right side? Do they open, lengthen? Do they stay holding you together, keeping a firm cage around your vital organs, your heart, your lungs, part of your liver? And each time you reach with your hand towards the wall above you, notice if you tend to inhale or exhale. Then just rest your arm. Tune in for a minute to your shoulder, your neck, your back. Notice if you're following the principle of less is more. Never do anything that hurts or hurts more. If you're listening and resting when you need to. And then lengthen your right leg down. So keep your left leg bent, but lengthen your right leg so your knee is relatively straight. And see if you can just reach your leg downward, like you're pointing your toes and reaching downward towards the wall below your feet. And again, what happens in your pelvis, in your spine? Can you find that gentle lengthening through your right side? Lengthening and resting. And then what if you include your arm with that? What if you reached your arm towards the wall above your head and reached your leg towards the wall below you at the same time, just lengthening the whole side, opening those ribs towards the ceiling, noticing how you're breathing. And every time you lengthen your leg down and your arm up, intentionally breathe in. And when you bring back to neutral, breathe out. And then try it a few times the other way. Breathing out as you lengthen up and down. Breathing in as you bring your arm and your leg back to a resting position. And just a few more times, and then roll onto your backs and rest. And again, just bring your attention to noticing. Feel yourself breathing in and out. Feel the movement available in the ribs, the left side, the right side, front of you, in back of you. And notice where else do you feel the breath. Is your body letting go of resistance? So you can feel your breath in your abdomen, your pelvis. You might even feel a little bit of movement in your shoulder joints and your hip joints. And then again, roll onto your left side, please. And this time, go ahead and play with lifting your head and your foot up, and then lengthening your arm and your leg up and down. Lifting, lowering, then lengthening and coming to rest. And just feel that through your system. Everything gets a little shorter. Everything gets a little longer. And where does your breathing fit into this pattern? Is your jaw soft and relaxed, or are you really focusing hard to do it right? Fortunately, in Feldenkrais, there is no right, there is no wrong, just the opportunity to be curious, to explore, to discover your own kinesthetic repertoire. Great. And then again, roll onto your backs. Feel the space on the inside of your ribs. The space available for your right lung to expand and take in oxygen. The space for your left lung. How your back is resting on the floor, behind your shoulder blades and your ribs, your lower back, your pelvis. And then please roll to your right sides. And just notice, without changing anything or doing anything, notice the ribs on your left side between your pelvis and your shoulder. The movement in the ribs with each inhalation and exhalation. And notice, when you first notice, is your sense of the outside of your ribs, where I would touch if I were to place my hands on you, or do you begin to sense the inside of your ribs? So again, bring your attention to the inside of those ribs and get to know them intimately with your imagination. With each inhalation, just begin painting the inside of each rib, where it touches the back of the sternum and connects into the spine. Wrapping around yourself, feeling the space where your lungs live, where your heart lives. You might notice that it's easier to attend to this side or more difficult, that there's naturally less movement or more movement on this side. And when you've completed painting the inside of your ribs, just imagine how the movement of your head and your arm, either raising or lowering, will affect the ribs. Can you imagine the ribs coming more together and opening and expanding more fully apart with the help of movement in your upper body? Can you imagine more movement as you support it with movement in your pelvis and your lower leg? Can you begin to sense how the ribs are no longer a boxed-in cage somewhere in between your pelvis and your shoulders and head, but a moving, truly breathing structure of connection? That one relates to the other, and that relationship is strongly influenced by your choices of how you move and allow for freedom of movement or resistance of movement and breath through your middle, through your ribs. So just keep imagining what movement in those ribs is like as you support it with movement in your head, shoulder, and pelvis. And when you're ready, just explore whichever movements are interesting to you. Which actual movement do you really want to feel? Do you really want to feel yourself lifting your head, or do you really want to get a sense of your pelvis coming up and down? And just play. What's it like to be lying on your side and have permission to just wiggle and play? And find your ribs through your pelvis, and find your ribs through your shoulder. Find your ribs through your breath. Just like you did so many, many years ago. But you didn't know you were doing it then, when you were a few months old, wiggling on the floor. Always letting the breath be the backdrop. Am I breathing in or breathing out? Is my breath supporting the movement or sort of going against the grain of the movement? The breath is always a doorway to the now. We just have to choose to feel it. And through these lessons we can discover more and more and more ways to feel our breath. To let the ease and the grace of our breath invite us into a sense of ease and grace in our bodies. Just rest on your sides for a moment and feel the breath circling the inside of the ribs on the left, from the sternum to the back, around from back to front and front to back, feeling all that spaciousness inside. And then just roll onto your backs, please. And lying here now, see if you can have a sense. Is one side, where your ribs are along the side, is one side more naturally what I would call flexed, where the shoulder is just a little closer to the rim of the pelvis? than the other side? Do you have one side that's a little longer and one side that's a little shorter? Maybe through this lesson they all feel incredibly, beautifully even, or incredibly and beautifully asymmetrical. But just feel the breath going into both sides, the right side, the left side, lifting your sternum and the ribs in front of you, opening and expanding the ribs on your sides, gently pressing the ribs in the back into the floor with each inhalation. And then with the paintbrush of your breath, begin to circle the whole inside from the sternum around to one side, across the back, and around the other side, circling each rib, and then going up or down a notch depending on whether you started below or above. Just feeling that space with your mind's eye, brushing around and around, noticing if you used a color or multicolors. And when you've gotten all the way to the top or bottom, again, depending on where you chose to start, reverse the direction and go back up or down. Really feeling, sensing the space as you discover the insides of your ribs with your imagination. And then one leg at a time, please bend your knees up. And bring your hands down to your sides if they're not at your sides. And just very gently slide one hand down towards one foot and slide it back up and slide the other hand down, and just feel the movement in the ribs with this motion on your back. As you slide one hand down, the shoulder comes towards the pelvis. You may notice yourself using that foot to bring the pelvis towards the shoulder. So one side of your ribs closes and the other expands and opens like an accordion. Notice, is your jaw soft? Can you let your neck go and just let your head roll with your arm that's sliding down? Let your head just go from side to side if that seems natural to you. Feel the support of your feet. If you're going to slide your arms down, what's really giving you that counter support? You're probably really grounding yourself through your feet to allow for this movement in your ribs and your pelvis. And maybe just wiggle a little bit. Just side to side, shoulders down, 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 ribs side, side, side. Just kind of really move in whatever way you feel moved to find those ribs, to play with your middle. The only time we ever play with our middle is when we're looking at our fat in the mirror. Or if we're women, worried about our breasts in the mirror. But the ribs, they just live there, ready to help us move or help us resist life in whichever way we've learned how, unconsciously. And now we can become more conscious. So just rest again. And just imagine yourself for a moment. First, just imagine walking around with this openness in your chest, in your ribs, in your breathing. And see if you can imagine a potential tense moment that you might encounter today or in the next few days, or maybe something that happened yesterday. It could just be an uncomfortable situation at the grocery store. It could be something at work. It could be going home and feeling rushed to make dinner. But just imagine that and see if you can feel, what is it you do with your breath and your ribs when you're facing frustration or anger or feeling rushed. And see if in your imagination, in that moment, standing in your kitchen or at work or sitting in your car, you can bring the breath back. You can open the ribs back up. You don't need to resist the situation. Just let it be a situation that happens to be in your life at that moment. Good. And if you find yourself in that awkward, uncomfortable, frustrating situation later today, you might notice that it takes minutes or hours to come back to the sensations in your body and to breathe fully into your lungs, into your abdomen, letting your ribs soften and lift and lower. And that's fine. Because yesterday you might not have ever let go of your ribs. And now you did it, even if it was hours or days later. And with practice, you'll catch yourself more and more throughout the day, letting go, winding up and letting go. So when you go to bed at night, you're not a tightly wound top that doesn't know how to unwind the stress or the pain or the worries. Because as you let go of those in little bits throughout the day, they don't accumulate to press on you at night. So with this sense of breath through your trunk, please roll to your sides and sit. In your own time, come to standing. Play with walking around and just being in this sensory experience. And have a light and beautiful day.